Hi, I'm Jayne Turk, and we're back with language, so let's talk turkey. Before we get into our deep discussions on language, I wanted to make sure that we're understanding how everything connects. And I think about this a lot when I think about how we learn to communicate. So, when you were 1 or 2, you probably learned to walk. And nobody said, dude, now that you walk, you should be able to run marathons. You should be able to snowboard. You should be a prima ballerina. You know how to be a soccer player. No, when you're going to get any of those skills, you get additional training. You expected to have an additional learning curve. And I think it's really important that we understand that communication skills are the same way, that you're going to have an additional learning curve with every new skill that we tackle. And so when we talk about introducing ourselves, we're also talking about bragging and perception and grace and, yes, language. When we talk about bragging, we're talking about bragging the right way. And yes, we're talking about perception and grace and language. So all of these skills that you've learned are building on each other and helping you to be a more successful communicator. And I want to be very clear. You're already doing a darn good job of communicating. You couldn't have got this far if you weren't. So these skills are not about what's wrong with you. It's more about when something you're doing isn't working, here's some options to fix it. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we're utilizing all of these skills together and utilizing them as building blocks as we go forward. So for the discussion board this week, and for those of you playing along at home, I want you to write out pen and paper and answer these questions for me. For those of you doing it for the discussion board, you can copy and paste this box. It's in your discussion board and fill in the blanks. So, first one. We're friends. Of course we are. I want you to imagine that I ran into you and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. I've missed you so much. I'm really broke right now, but we have to get together and do lunch. So what you're going to write down is where we're going for lunch and how much it's going to cost for both of us. So in the first box, you're going to write down where we're going for lunch. In the second box, the total price. Then after you do that, the next question. Again, we're still friends. And I ran into you. Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in so long, and I have great news. I just got a raise and a promotion at work. We need to go out and do dinner and celebrate. Same questions. Where are we going? How much is it going to cost for the two of us? The next one is, how much are you willing to spend on a pair of shoes for you? Next one, how much is appropriate for your significant other to spend on an interview outfit? Next one, how much is appropriate to spend on a new car? And last one, what is your dessert threshold? How much money does it become too much money to spend on dessert? We'll talk about these answers later. So the chapter that you're reading in your book is called Language Barrier and Bridge, and this is an example of some of the things that are in that chapter, and I'm not going to cover them all here. I'm just going to talk about a couple of key issues that I want to delve into a little bit deeper. So let's start by talking about understandings and misunderstandings. So, if my husband dumps me and I'm looking for a new man, I'm really lucky because right down the hall from my office, there's apparently a room where that's what they keep in there. Right? Isn't that what that room's for? Oh, maybe it's this one. Is that where I go to get a new man? Or if I decide I want to go a little younger, do I go here? And of course the answer is these aren't the places that we go, although Tinder might look an awful lot like that these days. But the meanings, we all hopefully know what those words mean, are not in the words, they're in people. So if I say I want a new man, you know that I'm not looking for the men's restroom. If I say, where do men go? You might misunderstand that question and point me to the men's restroom, or you might understand it the way that I meant it and tell me that I should go looking at Home Depot. Whatever the case, meanings lie not in the words themselves, but in people. In fact, for the 500 most commonly used dictionary definitions, we have over 10,000 words. So lots of different words can mean lots and lots of different things. So if I say, I love you, I could mean, please do the dishes. When I say I love you, I could mean, we're really great friends. When I say I love you, I could mean, get naked now. And hopefully we can tell the difference. We're going to talk a little bit more about the difference when we talk about nonverbal communication. But again, it's important to understand that we have different levels of interpreting what people mean when they say these things. So I wanted to also talk about the way that we talked about praise early on and how we might say someone is smart or beautiful or strong or helpful, all of the positive words, right? We say those positive words. We want to make sure that those positive words aren't with a critical connotation and that we're definitely not using but. In fact, I've been working really hard on eliminating but from my vocabulary because we might say smart but evil, or not book smart but street smart, or street smart and stupid. And along those lines, we have the famous shit sandwich, which many of you actually got trained to do, is that when we're going to discipline somebody or criticize somebody, we're going to say, hey, you did this thing right, but you need to do this thing differently because this thing sucks, and we still love you. You still have a job. I just want to say that regardless of what your image was in that conversation, that you need to remember that a shit sandwich is still a shit sandwich. So, up next, the impact of language. We know it has impact, right? Because we know that there are sometimes you can say something one way and it's really successful with that person and that interaction. You could say the exact same thing and someone else, because language is in people, is going to have a different meaning. So I wanted to talk a little bit about names and nicknames. The day that I turned 18, I had my name legally changed. And no, I'm not going to tell you what it was. That was why I had it changed. But changing my name helped me to be a person I liked better. And some of you have had that same experience, and I know that it's a big debate in several communities now about when people are allowed to change their names. I just didn't like my name, so I got one that I liked better. And I changed my last name because I was tired of people realizing who I was related to and judging me based on that. Nicknames also have a lot of power. So if your nickname was less than fortunate, it might have stuck with you. It might have given you some baggage. And even if your nickname was at one time appropriate, it may not still be a positive and encouraging thing. So I want to caution you to exercise restraint when you are assigning nicknames to people, and also understanding how powerful that naming is. Whether you're naming your kids or you are giving nicknames to your friends, you want to make sure that they're things that are going to encourage them to be the best version of themselves. So my childhood nickname was Boo, which was significantly better than what my next door neighbor used to say whenever she saw me. She used to say, why, she ain't no bigger than a pissant. And so pissant was also one of my unfortunate nicknames. I also want us to understand the incredible power language has. The power of naming things, of taking responsibility for things, and really claiming the identity of people and places and events. If you think about the power that language wields when we are upset with people and the things that we can say. So we talked earlier about labeling something as selfish or not generous, and how incredibly powerful that can be. I want us to remember that as we talk about language. I want us to remember that sometimes our language says, hey, we're in this together. And as a speech teacher, I encourage my students to say things like, we're going to learn, we're going to explore, because that's the us. But the other people, the othering, those people like that kind of language really indicates a divide and separates us rather than bringing us together. And I say y'all because I like y'all, and it is a thing that brings us all together. I also use other slang terms. So dude refers to everybody. And I also use terms of endearment, which again can be effective. I might call you honey or darling or sweetheart. And if you don't like it and you let me know that and I continue to do it, that's disrespectful, right? Because we want to be called the way we want to be called. So entirely dependent on our relationship and how those languages, those names work with who we are and what we're doing. So what are the next steps? There's a lot of them. So I hope that you stopped this video and did your discussion board with your list of things and prices. So where we went to lunch and how much it cost, all the way down to how much money is too much money to spend on dessert. I hope you watched this video and the TED Talk that are also listed in the discussion board. And then I want you to return to the discussion board and reply to yourself, are there people in your life whose answers would be significantly different than yours? And what impact does that have? Do you talk about money in those relationships? And then reply to a classmate, also by Friday, who had at least one answer significantly different than yours. How might these different answers impact a relationship? Show me how you could start a conversation about money. And then I want you to write your simulation journal entry on language clarity. Date it, language clarity for the topic. Respond to, was the technique effective? Why or why not? Reminders for next time. Is this skill integrated? And also revisit your 35 trait list and analyze based on this conversation as well as the other conversations that we have. Then I want you to also practice replacing but with and. So before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about the whole money connection that we just finished analyzing in our discussion boards and that you wrote about and posted about. I've done this activity with classes, and for instance, the I'm broke lunch one has been everything from we'd go dumpster diving and get food from behind a grocery store for free, dude. And lots of people who have generously said, well, I'd invite you over to my house and I'd make lunch for you. Awesome answers. I'm not sure I'm ready to go dumpster diving, but incredibly thrifty. I know there have been times in my life that $5 was more than what I could spend on lunch. And for those of you that did the perception checking activity where you discussed your friend who's said no multiple times about why they couldn't go to lunch, maybe that was the reason. Maybe they wanted to go spend time with you, but just couldn't afford going out to lunch, and talking about money can be super awkward. So the reason that I start this conversation with money is because money is a very concrete example of language. And we think it means the same thing, but it doesn't. It doesn't. My husband and I had this conversation the other day about the price of eggs. So depending on when you see this video, the price of eggs may be very much in the front of your mind, or it may no longer be relevant. But he was saying, oh my gosh, it's like $1 per egg. And I said, yes, that's a lot more than we're used to paying. And $1 an egg, $1 a serving is still not very much money. So our perspective is very much based on what our family experiences are, how we view money. And this is why talking about money, where it seems so concrete, is so fraught with danger and difficulty, and one of the number one reasons that people have difficulties in their relationships. So that where do you want to go to dinner? I don't know. Where do you want to go? Conversation is very much about money. Part of it is, I don't know how much money we're talking about spending, even if we have a shared budget. Not that you're treating or I'm treating, but I don't know what kind of a place we're looking at going. So are we looking at fast food? Are we looking at sit down? Are we looking at dropping a couple $100? So the reason that those conversations about money are so important, and the reason that I ask you to do them today, is because the way that you view it and the way that people in your life view it can be significantly different. And so it's super important that instead of just assuming that we have the same weight on those dollar amounts, that we have conversations about them, that we actually define our terms. And so as we were looking at the concept of money, and I brought in, shoes. So what are you willing to spend on a pair of shoes for you? I've had many student athletes over the years who have spent hundreds of dollars on shoes. Perfect. And when you compare that to how much money you think your significant other should spend on a job interview outfit, sometimes there's a very large discrepancy. And unless we talk about those things, we're going to have hurt feelings. We're going to have confusion. We're going to have people unhappy about money. We're going to get back to the money conversation when we get into power dynamics towards the end of the semester. But today I wanted to talk about it in terms of language because I think it's so important. And I hope you had fun defining those dollar amounts. And I encourage you to talk to your parents and your grandparents, older people in your life, about how much money they think is appropriate to spend on a car, how much money they think rent costs today for an average-sized living environment. And I think that you'll both be surprised with those conversations. And as far as the dessert one goes, I had to throw that in because way back in the day, I was reading about a restaurant in New York City that had a dessert on their menu that cost $10,000. And I don't know what my moral limit is on how much I'd spend on dessert, but I know it is way under $10,000. In fact, if a date took me out there, and I'm going to assume that he or she could afford that 10 grand price tag, and they suggested that we have this dessert, I would end that relationship because that $10,000 would provide so many families with meals that were starving. And that dessert with the gold flake on top, I'm going to poop it out, and I am not sifting through my poop to get the pieces of gold flake. So I am literally shitting that money away. I can't do it. Your number might be different than mine, and that's totally okay. I'm not judging you. I just want to know, what is your moral limit on the price of a dessert? Finally, I want to throw in a couple of other word terms that I want you to know. Fopdoodle is actually a real word. I did not make it up, and it's one that I want you to all know. So a fopdoodle is an insignificant person. And folks, lots of people in your lives, including me, are insignificant. So if someone is being critical, someone is giving you a hard time, someone cut you off in traffic and then flipped you off, you can just think to yourself, why, that's a fopdoodle. Because we can't let a fopdoodle bother us, right? Because they're just a fopdoodle. And so finding words that you can use in your vocabulary that are fun and can lessen your stress can be very useful. And those of you that know me in person know that I like to swear. And swearing has actually been correlated with high intelligence. It's also been correlated with reduced levels of physical pain. They've done this one study where they had people stub their toes, and some of them got to swear and some of them did not, and the actual recorded physical pain was lower when they swore. However, my caveat, there's a difference between swearing and swearing at someone. So if I am like, fuck, I stubbed my toe, that's one thing. But if I'm saying, you fucking suck, that's another thing, and probably going to result in a higher level of defensiveness. So do one if you want to. Don't do the other. And finally, I want to talk about putting periods in sentences. So I don't need to have that shit sandwich. I don't need to have that but. I don't need to link those two ideas. In fact, if you look at the critiques that I give you when I'm responding to your discussion board posts, I'm not doing it in any particular order. I'm doing it in the order I read it or the order that I was thinking about it when I responded. So, wow, I really like this, period. Work on, for instance, using more specific praise when you are leaving with grace. Work on expressing that appreciation more directly, more specifically, period. I don't have to say but. I don't even have to say and. I can use that period to separate my ideas without linking them. And I want you to think about it this way. If I say to you, wow, you are so beautiful, but holy cow, this XYZ feature is really unfortunate. What are you going to hear? What are you going to focus on? What are you going to remember? And you're going to remember everything after the but. Everything before the but doesn't count. If I say, I'm really enjoying you participating in class, but I wish you would talk less, you're going to hear, I want you to be quiet. So I want to encourage you, if you have two things to say, a positive and a negative, don't link them. Make them separate sentences, and sometimes, if you can, make them separate conversations. We're going to talk more about criticism a little bit later on. So I want to end this class, as I do my classes in person, by telling you all that I love you. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you listening. And I hope you'll join me. Let's talk Turkey with Jayne Turk. Have a great week.